Hi, and welcome to our podcast, Books Don't Review Themselves. I'm Kim.
I'm Jess.
And today we're talking about Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. It just recently came out on July 2nd.
I guess another thing to note is that when we ended up getting the book through NetGalley, Riley Sager actually, this book is part of Book of the Month Club. It's one of the options that people can purchase, but he's the only author this is his third book that's been available through Book of the Month Club. So he's the only author to have had that happen 3 times.
That's pretty cool.
So,
I guess just starting right out, I always read the dedications to books. Most people, dedicate it to their spouses or to their children or to their parents, which is lovely. But this one was dedicated to Ira Levin. And I was excited as soon as I saw that because I love horror movies. And I'm like, anyone who enjoys horror movies should know, this author. He wrote the book Rosemary's Baby, and Roman Polanski later made it into a movie. It was also a miniseries on TV. I believe it was 2014, so that was about 5 years ago. I think it was a 4-part miniseries. It was good. It was okay. The book isn't that long, so I don't think you can mess up the movie / TV series that bad. Not like, Stephen King book, 600 pages. You got a lot of room to mess with that.
right.
I know you had mentioned in your notes about the Heart of a Dreamer book, and you were saying something how you enjoyed having the...
Yeah, so I guess first of all, I had read, and I think you had read too, Final Girls by Riley Sager, and I didn't really take notes on it. I probably read it 2 years ago now, I would say. And I looked back and I gave that 3 stars.
So what were you thinking? Do you remember why you gave it 3 stars?
I don't remember, and so I think I'm going to have to reread it. But this one I would give 5 stars for sure. I really enjoyed the way this book was written. In one of our previous podcasts, I talk about how I really enjoyed how Lisa Scottolini wrote her 2 latest books, basically going between narrators. Each chapter was a different narrator. Some people get confused that way. It can be at first.
I get confused if I don't read the chapter headings. Right. I'm like, oh, yeah, and then I have to go back. Usually... Because I would get confused too, but after kind of reading the first sentence or so, you're like, okay, this is who's talking or whatever. With his book, he did it kind of like that, but he incorporated 6 days earlier, 5 days earlier.
Yep, and then he did chapters in between that were kind of short and italicized that were now. So I felt like you were really in her head during those now chapters, and then kind of towards the middle end of the book, it switches to now and then after, 3 days later, 4 days later. And then I also really liked how a lot of the book, most of the book is built around a book called Heart of the Dreamer by Greta Manville. And I Googled it to see if it was a real book, and I didn't find anything, so I just thought it was really cool that he essentially created this whole book within a book, and then this whole author and persona and everything within a book.
That actually happens in a lot of different stories. It's a fun way. I enjoy when they even write... I mean, he did touch a little bit about what was written in the book, Heart of a Dreamer, but I enjoy books even more when they touch on that more. Going back to, the 6 days earlier and so on and so forth, that it seems to be a trend in thrillers, between the different points of view right now. That's been probably the past 4 or 5 years. You've been seeing a lot of that. I do enjoy it most of the time. Sometimes I do get confused. I think the one that really, maybe it was the first one that I read with this type of thing, it was The Girl on the Train. I think Paula Hawkins is the author.
That book was a little hard to read, I felt.
Yeah, and maybe that just was, added to it. I was maybe 6 chapters in when I'm like, what is going on? So then I went back and I'm like, oh, different people, different time, so on and so forth. So now definitely every time I pick up a thriller, I check for that first of all, but pretty much any book. But the other thing that I enjoy about that is when you write like that, it makes it go faster. It's more thrilling.
Yep.
Because you're like, okay, this is going, now this is going, now this is going. So that's a really good technique to do.
And I think to add to that, the thing that I like about like this book and Lisa Scottolini and the way they did it, where I think Girl on the Train was a little bit different, is when you start getting into like dates and times and dividing your chapters up that way, that's too much.
That's too much.
Because, you know, if I'm reading this on lunch, I have a half hour, you know, to read this, and it's like I can read a chapter and say, okay, this was 6 days ahead, or you know, whatever. But to be like, oh, this was January 1st at 12 p.m. and then the next one is 4 days later, you know, January 5th, 3 p.m. That to me is too much, and I think maybe Girl on the Train was a little bit more that way, and that just to me it gets things jumbled too quickly.
So keep it nicer and easier to read. I guess the next part that I just have to bring up really quick is Jules Larson is the main character in the book, and she's 25 years old. In almost every book I read, the character has to be under 30. You know, the main character, especially if it's a woman, and usually it's even 28 or younger. And I'm just like, okay.
I think people just feel like because you're that age and you're a female that you're just probably really naive and...
Yeah, which, I mean, I guess works for thrillers and cozy mysteries and stuff. You know, when you're getting into fantasy, you know, epic fantasy and stuff, I don't want all my female characters naive. I want some that can kick ass.
Right.
So, and, you know, I think to myself, is it because I'm in my 40s and that's what's bothering me? But... no, I don't really think that's what it is. Women can be every age, and they don't need to be 28 or younger. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. And readers out there, I mean, do you notice this a lot? Do you care? Does it bother you? Like I said, had you even noticed it before I mentioned something? You know, whatever. I guess the big part of the book for me was all of the red flags. There were so many. And once again, going back to Rosemary's Baby, if you've never watched it, I highly recommend it. It's good. I would read the book first and then watch it, but do whatever you want. But because I had read the book, watched the movie, and watched the miniseries, my mind instantly started looking even further.
You know, and that's probably the big difference between you and I, because when I read... when you texted me and said, have you seen Rosemary's Baby? I've heard of it, never saw it. No idea who the guy was that he dedicated the book to until you said that to me. So we probably read this a little bit differently because you...
which is cool.
Which, you know, you knew going in, like, oh, this is the type of book it's going to be. Where for me, I was like, what? What? I'm like, what is going on? What?
See, and I'm interested to see your reactions, you know, to some of the red flags. Whereas me, if you were to look at my notes, I'm like, every single one I'm being sassy with. I'm like, oh, Jules. They want to know if you don't have a family because they're going to kill you. You know, it's like, come on. So if you're a reader and if you've never seen Rosemary's Baby or don't watch horror movies, that type of thing, like, were you really surprised with this? Or could you kind of see things coming and, you know, think ahead like, this is why they're asking these questions?
I was surprised.
Were you?
Yeah. I did not, knowing it was going to be a thriller, I was surprised. You clearly knew something weird was going to happen. And that's even in the description, because the whole premise of this book is that she goes to New York. There's this big, beautiful, ancient building, with like these gargoyles and everything. And at the point in the book where it really starts to get interesting is she loses her job and is able to stay at the Bartholomew.
Not only does she lose her job, but it's the same day that she comes home and finds her boyfriend having sex with someone else. So that's a great day for her.
So she's sleeping essentially on her friend's couch, and she sees an ad in the paper because she's job hunting for an apartment sitter at the Bartholomew, which is something she's always...
Everyone looks at that building.
Yeah, and dreams of that building. And then her roommate kind of warns her, like, hey, a lot of weird shit happens there. Like, have you heard of the curses and this and that? So you knew early on something weird was going to happen. Did I think that not having a family and not being tied down was a red flag? No, because my thought process was, you're in this fancy apartment. They don't want
children running around.
Yeah, they don't want kids. So to me that made sense. Obviously later on, other things start to make sense. But early on, to me, that made sense that, okay, they want a single occupant who can be responsible because of the fact that these apartments are millions and millions of dollars.
And when they're asking, do you drink a lot or do drugs? And she said no. And I'm thinking to myself, because they want to keep your body pure for whatever they're going to do to it. Then they ask about if you have any family. And she's like, no. And I'm like, that way no one will come looking for you. That was all the stuff going through my mind.
Yeah. And again, that kind of all made me think like, okay, responsibility-wise, they want someone who is going to fuck up the apartment.
Yeah. They give them $4,000 a month?
Yeah, $4,000 a month because it was $12,000 total.
And they pay in cash every week or every other week. And right there, that was another red flag. I'm like, they're paying in cash, so there's no paper trail.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought that was weird for sure. And the amount of money was a lot.
That was a lot.
And the thing is like I was explaining this book to my husband the best way that I could. And he was, I was telling him that, this building is supposed to be cursed and all this stuff. And I was like, but they offer her $12,000 for 3 months. He's like, holy shit, I'd do it.
I know, I'd live
and
there.
I was like, see, I think that's anybody, unless you're a millionaire, but I think that's kind of anyone's initial response, whether you need money or not. You're like, yeah. And
then plus she needed money so badly.
Right.
And they prey on those type of people who are down and out.
Right.
Not so down and out where they're like abusing drugs. The other thing that I noticed that I'm sure you didn't even get on your radar was all the floors have 4 apartments on them, except for the floor that she lives on, which is the 12th floor. And on the 12th floor, there's only 2 apartments. So my instant thought, just going back to Rosemary's Baby, was, okay, so there's only 2 apartments on this floor. What is that extra space being used for? So I knew right away that, obviously, I thought that they were going to be peeking in on her, and I was thinking possibly like
hiding spaces almost? Or?
Yeah, and I thought maybe, putting it on the internet, when she's getting dressed or something. That was one of my thoughts. And, I don't want to spoil this for you if you haven't seen Rosemary's Baby. So, if you haven't, maybe go watch it and then come back to the podcast. Because the other thing, besides the extra space, like hiding, I'm like, what kind of experiments or something is going on over there? So, that was my other thought with that, too.
Yeah, that didn't cross my radar at all. I just figured, kind of like in New York in general, like the higher up apartments are bigger and like floors. So I just figured bigger apartments. Yeah.
Like the penthouse is a bigger space. Then a bit later on, she gets introduced to her downstairs neighbor, Ingrid. She lives on the 11th floor.
She lives right below her, directly below her, and they have a
dumbwaiter.
Yep, a dumbwaiter, which I'm not totally sure what that is. I'm just thinking of like a pulley system.
Yeah, and the library actually has one. It's like a little elevator, and in the olden days they would put food in it, to go up and down the floors, and then we used it for books. But when I read that little part, my 2 thoughts, first of all, I thought of Halloween H2O, Halloween the 20th anniversary, I guess is that what it is, but with Jamie Lee Curtis, and there's a dumbwaiter scene in there, so that made me think of that, and I'm like, ooh, so like thinking this way when I read this type of stuff, I wonder like if the author is also thinking about that. Obviously he was thinking about Rosemary's Baby because he dedicated it to him, to Ira, but I'm like, did he also watch Halloween H2O? Was this something that was just kind of sitting in the back of his head and he thought he'd use it? But as soon as I saw the dumbwaiter, read the dumbwaiter, I'm like, okay, that's obviously going to play a part in something. She's going to be running away from someone and hiding in it or something. So it does come back later. But they also used the dumbwaiter too. Ingrid was passing notes back and forth.
Yep.
And with the notes that Ingrid was passing back and forth, she would write them on different pages of books or poems, poetry and stuff.
Yep.
And
here I ended up, because I got this through NetGalley, it was just read on my Kindle. So I highlighted, because I was wondering if there was going to be a trend with the poems. And while I haven't gone through and read the poems, I do know like Robert Frost and Edgar Allan Poe. But the poems that she wrote the notes on the back of were Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson, Remember by Christina Rossetti, Fire and Ice by Robert Frost, and The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. So right off the bat, I kind of know a little bit of Emily Dickinson, and I do know a little bit of Robert Frost and Edgar Allan Poe, and I know their work's a little bit more gothic and like creepy. Mm-hmm. So I didn't go and actually look up the poem, but that kind of led me to believe that this was going to be heading in a weird direction.
And I did look up the poems afterwards. They were pretty short, all of them, which was nice because I don't read a lot of poetry. I wrote it in the past and have had some published, but I don't really read or write anymore. The one that, like, if you look, once again, I would love to talk to the author and be like, so what exactly were you thinking when you chose these poems to be included in with the book? And each one of them I could see kind of going with a little bit. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any that like really stood out to me like, oh, he's, giving us a total clue there.
Or something, yeah.
The only one that that I will say did was the last one, I believe it was the last one, Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. So to me, that gave a clue for later on. So, like, it's kind of fun when you read that kind of stuff. You're like, oh.
Yeah. It's like adding little hints within the hints
exactly
of the books. And I think he did a really good job of that, which kind of makes me wonder, like, what is the process when you sit down to write something like this? Like, do you know right off the bat you're going to incorporate these poems or whatever? Or do you decide later on, like, hey, this might be a fun
way to add more to it?
Yep.
And I think sometimes it's both and neither. They just start writing and then it comes to him. Other times he'll maybe have heard that Robert Frost poem and it just clicks something in his head and it's like stored there for later on to use in a story. All right. So I want to mention really, really quick. I love the movie Clue. It is one of my favorite movies and it was one of my favorite games to play when I was a child. And I love all things mystery. So yay. And it was towards the beginning of the book. And this was a direct quote, and they're talking about the apartment. Each room brings a new question, just like in a game of Clue. All that's missing are a billiard room and a ballroom. To me, even if the book wasn't as good as I thought it was, I think just this little part here would have like endeared me to the book just because. So readers out there, do you ever find this thing, where do you find when an author includes like a movie that you love or a song that you love and it just kind of makes you more happy and like
it's better. More sentimental.
Exactly. We were talking before how Leslie, the apartment shower person, she had asked the question if she had any family.
Right.
And she says she's thinking in her head, kind of, sort of, I do, but she tells her no, she doesn't. But it was in regards to her sister Jane, who Jane had finished her shift at work, and then she went out to a car and was talking to someone and then disappeared. And they don't know what happened to her. They don't know if she was murdered, if she just like moved to a different state. No idea.
And I think it's also, when we had spoken earlier about the whole book that he created within there, they grew up in a small town with nothing there. They grew up poor. So this book was something that her and her sister shared about the Bartholomew and Manhattan and this dream, like one day we'll get there. When her sister went missing, this whole opportunity came up. There was all the sentiment behind that as well.
Even though her best friend Chloe was saying, hey,
yeah, and emailing her like articles that are like, hey, did you read this? And I think we could probably talk about some of the things that were in that article because I don't think it gives away anything, but it's almost like any other, like if there's a haunted church that you know about in your town or something where it's like someone killed themselves here, someone was murdered here. So the article that was emailed to her was that type of things where it was like, it wasn't things that were recent. It was more things that were like, hey, in 1930, did you know this happened? In 1919.
What I enjoy too with that part is he makes a reference to American Horror Story, and that I enjoyed as well because I love American Horror Story, and if that's something that you have not watched, I think there's 6 seasons.
Oh God, I don't even know.
There's some people who like absolutely have certain seasons that they love, and they totally hate other seasons. I've enjoyed every single season for a different reason. I'm also always a season behind because we don't get whatever channel it's on. But if you haven't seen that, and if you enjoyed this book, perhaps that is something that you would want to watch.
I finished reading this book. Like, I spent all day on the 4th of July reading this book. And so I got to the point of the book where it's like, okay, you know, I know what's going to happen. And I was like, this is really fucking weird. And then something else happens. I'm like, wait, what? And then I'm like reading, and then I finish it, and my husband's like, did you finish your book? And I was like, I did. And I said, I don't really want to be home alone right now.
Whereas I watched a horror movie right after, turned off all the lights. I'm like, oh, let's see. And I watched Happy Birthday to Me. I'll write a review about it. There's things to say about that one. But I think also at the bottom in our notes section, like where we have our social links and our merchandise store and stuff, I think I'm also going to include all the different things that I questioned about, you know, like the bigger room size. Also, later on, the doctor gets her blood from an accident. And these are all things that I'm like, oh, for the love of God. So if you want to read that just to kind of see my thoughts, that's cool. If you want to skip it completely just so the book is, you know, a complete mystery to you, that's a way to do it as well.
Right.
The one thing that I do have to mention, though, going back to horror movies, sorry, I'm on this jag right now, is when Chloe was telling her about the curses on the building and stuff, she says that the man who built it killed himself by jumping off the roof. And for me, my first thought when I read this, I said, is that a nod to the nanny in The Omen? When she yells, she jumps off the roof, and then she's like, it's all for you, Damien. So once again, I want to talk to Riley and be like, hey, dude, do we have the same minds? Do we need to go to each other's houses and watch horror movies together and just, you know, be besties? So yeah, that amused me as well.
It doesn't really totally have to do with the book, but I remember when I read Final Girls, I know Riley's a unisex name, but I thought it was a female.
So did I.
And when I read Final Girls, I felt, yeah, that was written
in a woman's perspective.
Yeah, you can almost tell. But then when I got this book and it's like, okay, I want to know more about the author. I want to know more about, you know, where he's from, this kind of stuff. And I was like, wait, this is a guy. This is a guy. So then now reading this one, I took away something a little bit different than I did from like Final Girls. So I'm kind of wondering if I go back and reread Final Girls,
how you would think of it.
Yeah, how I would think of it. And I know people will say that doesn't matter, but it kind of does because reading like a Lisa Scottolini book as opposed to like a Riley Sager book or a Harlan Corbin book or something, you can tell the writing style between like a male and female is a little bit different. So this was a little bit more masculine in my opinion. And I enjoyed it. Like, I really enjoyed that. I felt a little more gory to me, a little more twisty, you know, like you said, because it was kind of an ode to
Rosemary's Baby.
Right.
For me, with Final Girls, I had looked up the author right away when I was reading it because I knew in my book reviews I always like to link back to the author's page. So Final Girls was like 4 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago.
Something like that.
And there was like nothing on the internet about him.
I don't know, was that one of his first books?
It was.
Was it his first book?
And I think they did that since, like you're saying, Riley is a unisex name. Yeah. I think they were doing that so it didn't cloud people's thoughts of him writing a book about final girls, about women, and having a man write it.
Right.
So that really stood out to me, and I would love to ask the publishers or whoever was in charge of marketing if that was their thought process behind that, because since then, I mean, I don't even think he was on Facebook at that time. Like, I could find, like, nothing about him.
No.
And now you can find stuff about him.
Right, and, you know, his big books are Final Girls, The Last Time I Lied, and then this book. I don't know if he's written other stuff. However, Riley Sager is a pseudonym. So maybe he's written other books in his you know, in his given name. Yeah, I just remember I was really excited about Final Girls, read it, enjoyed it, but not as much as I enjoyed this, and now I kind of wonder if I go back, maybe I didn't read it as detailed as I read this one, where I, you know, highlighted portions because I knew we were going to be doing this podcast and talking about it, where back then with Final Girls, I just sat there and read it. So I kind of wonder if maybe were there things like, you know, the poems and all that kind of stuff that were in this, was that in Final Girls? Because I don't remember.
No, it wasn't. But I think for me, for Final Girls too, I was entranced by it because of the Final Girls. Once again, going back to horror movies, the final girl that's left. So I think that made me love the book a little bit more. But I think if I were to go back and read it now, I gave it 4 stars out of 5. I think I might even give it less stars.
You think you would?
Yeah, I think I might. I don't have time to go back and read it, so I will never find out, but it's just a thought about that. Well, I mean, after this, it kind of starts getting more spoilery, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of things happen, like with most thrillers or horror, you know, it all comes to head really, really quickly at the end. There's a little bit more research. Jules is finally seeing that things are a little bit weird. So, you know, she goes to the library and she's talking to one of the other residents.
Yeah, one of the other apartment sitters. She's finding that previous apartment sitters
have disappeared
and left.
Or they've moved out.
Yeah, in the middle of the night with no notice. She starts noticing weird things like that.
There's like a flyer that she finally comes back to later on. And as soon as I saw that flyer, she doesn't look at it the first time because something is happening. But in my notes, I'm like, is it this person? I was wrong about which person it was, but where my thoughts were going was in the correct direction. But yeah, I think most of the rest, it's just kind of, it'd be too spoilery if we mention anything more. I definitely say read it. It was very enjoyable.
It was a very good book. I really enjoyed it.
Yes. If you enjoy horror, I think it'll give it a different look to you than people who don't watch or read horror. Like Jess was saying, you know, all the different poems. If you have time, you know, take a look at those. Maybe even beforehand, you know, just kind of look through them, or during or after. It just, I think that's why I enjoyed it so much, is because he did include so many more things, you know, that you can look into if you want to. And one other thing that I do have to mention as well is, and it's because of a horror movie that I actually really, really enjoy. And if you have not seen The Skeleton Key, go watch it right now.
I feel like I've seen that a really long time ago. Does that have Drew Barrymore?
No, it has
Kate Hudson.
Kate Hudson in it.
Yes.
Nick, who is the doctor that lives next door to Jules, is talking about his apartment, and he inherited from his parents who died. And then just where my mind went, I'm like, is this a Skeleton Key type of situation? So for you to know what I'm talking about, if you watch The Skeleton Key, then you'll know. But if you haven't, you need to go watch The Skeleton Key, and then then you'll know what I'm talking about.
And I think the one other thing to note is you'll notice a major theme in this book is rich versus poor.
Yes.
You know, wealthy versus unwealthy. That was a very common theme. You know, I noticed it in the beginning because it was like, people down on their luck, you're going to get all this money, blah, blah, blah. But it really comes to a head at the end in a very interesting way. I don't think this will give anything away. We had talked about the rules. One of the last things after, you know, everything's said and done, there was a quote that I thought was just absolutely phenomenal, because Jules basically throughout this whole book, she starts off kind of meek and kind of doesn't seem super strong-willed. You know, she's down on her luck, and that was on purpose. But towards the end of the book, it's like she's a fighter, like she's a badass. And so one of the last quotes in the book was, after she received multiple life sentences, I sent her a list of rules she needed to follow in prison. At the top was this: no night spent away from your cell. Which to me was just like a good old, like, fuck you. Exactly. And I loved that quote. I highlighted that quote. It made me giggle when I read it. I just thought that was perfect.
Okay. Well, thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, and tell all your friends. Down below, we will have, like I said, all of our socials. We have a link to a merchandise store if you so desire. I'll also put my notes, my thoughts kind of going through with all the red flags if that's something you want to read as well. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. But yeah, I would probably give this book a 5 out of 5. I don't know what you would give it.
I would definitely give this one a 5 out of 5 too.
So, yeah, highly recommend.
Yay! Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.